I do want to now. I have to go adjust this point a little bit because now that I'm looking up their stats, it's a little bit eerily similar. But the point I was going to make once you brought up the games was that the last quarterback I remember that was kind of demoted down the depth chart like this 4 games into his career as a first-round pick was Paxton Lynch. And visually, and it's my memory of what happened, and I watched those games with Paxton Lynch, not in-depthly, but I watched them. And I have, of course, in-depthly watched Trey Lance's 4 starts. But visually, I remember Paxton Lynch being legitimately terrible. And I don't ever get the feeling when I watch Trey Lance through 4 games, Larry. I'm not going to tell you it was the greatest football ever, right? There were some pretty ugly misses in those 4 games, right? The first play he ever has in the second half against Seattle, they get a little bootleg action, a little flat to Kittle. He one-hops it to him. He one-hopped the screen to Debo at the end of the half against the Bears. So there were some ugly misses. Outstanding throws too, right? Like the layered ball to Ray McCloud, the throw to Tyler Kroft on 3rd and 14 in the second half against the Bears. So we've got a mixed bag. But the point is I never found it to be terrible. But let me read you some stats here, Larry, okay?
Okay.
And this is a little bit incomplete because one of these quarterbacks got injured in the time he played, and the other quarterback didn't. And again, this is also incomplete because now I have to go back and watch Paxton Lynch. But I was surprised by how eerily similar these stats are through 4 games in 2 years. So Trey Lance has actually participated in 8 games. Of course, he scored 2 touchdowns in games that he didn't start. But he is 56 for 102 attempts with 55% completion percentage, 797 yards in his career, 5 touchdowns, 3 picks, okay? Paxton Lynch, in those 4 games that he played, 5 games he participated in, 4 starts through 2 years. He was released, by the way, the subsequent year by the Denver Broncos. I am not making a Trey Lance, Paxton Lynch comparison here, by the way. It's just crazy how similar the stats are. But Paxton Lynch was 79 for 128, 61.7% completion percentage, 792 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
Right.
We're talking about the same numbers here, basically, through 4 games, right? And my perception of the situation, and this is why I want to go back and watch it, because I remember Paxton Lynch being legitimately terrible. And those numbers aren't that bad, right? They're not indicative, of a quarterback that was drafted in the first round and given up on in 4 games, right? And I have, in a lot of ways, similar feelings towards Trey Lance, even though I was never a big proponent of this entire thing, because I think he still has a large amount of potential that's untapped because it's only 4 games into his career. I'm blown away now that these 2 examples, the numbers are this similar. That was a lot of incomplete thoughts from me, Krug. What are your conclusions from that? Because I honestly am now trying to figure out how to think of it because I didn't look up the stats until 2 minutes ago. And the stats are shockingly similar here, and I do not view them as similar players or even Trey Lance anywhere near that track of being a bust the way Paxton Lynch was.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that if you look at the last decade of NFL quarterbacks drafted in the first round, you're going to find that it's way, way more risky to draft these guys in the first round than we make it seem. We make it seem like it's a slam dunk, and it ain't. It's not a slam dunk. And for every Josh Allen and for every Patrick Mahomes, there's 3 E.J. Manuels and 4 Johnny Manziels and 5 Blake Bortles. You know what I mean? It's like there's just it's a failure-ridden deal. So I just think that, I mean, it's even guys who have made it, there's a lot of guys, Teddy Bridgewater was a first-round pick. He made it in the league, but he hasn't really made it as an NFL. I guess he's made some money, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's a failure-ridden thing. So, I guess we should just all kind of realize that, when you take a first-round quarterback, there's a miss rate. There's a swing and miss rate. Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. I mean, none of these guys are awesome. There's a lot of misses there. So it's not like, oh my God, people are like Kyle Shanahan and what should happen to Kyle Shanahan. It's like, I mean, I think it's safe to say that we have to kind of put our arms around at least the possibility that, you know what, they may have swung and missed. They took a gamble on a really inexperienced quarterback who's arguably, or actually not arguably, he is, when you look at total passes thrown, the most inexperienced NFL quarterback that went in the first round in the last 40 years.
Do you know
And
what the average number of attempts for a Hall of Fame quarterback in college was?
no,
So I did this research last year. Unfortunately, it was on my old computer, the full document. But if I remember correctly off the top of my head, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But that number is somewhere between 800 to 1,200 pass attempts. I think the average Hall of Famer might be 1,200 pass attempts in college. That was their average number of throws. And then the average MVP quarterback. And that number is a little bit skewed because Cam Newton won an MVP and he only had one season of, I think, 300 something throws at Auburn, 330. But of course, he had the 2 seasons of junior college as well. So that does exist. Although, Larry, I will say it's tough to look at a situation when there seems to be so many moving parts and there seems to be so much movement towards moving a quarterback after 4 starts when, guys, like, let me describe it like this. Josh Rosen started more games for the Arizona Cardinals than Trey Lance has started for the San Francisco 49ers. And Josh Rosen was in Arizona for a year.
wow. I mean, here's the question too. The Niners also, I mean, do they not, if they've made this concrete evaluation, yeah, okay, it's one thing to say Brock Purdy's our guy. Okay, that's fine. But you took a long-term gamble on a quarterback that was really inexperienced. If you don't, so if you want to say he's not ready yet, okay, that's okay. But if you're going to say he's never going to be ready, man, I mean, you're going to get to that conclusion after 4 starts
Right.
and barely ever playing him? I mean, that's the dramatic part of it that kind of makes me go, well, wait a second. And then why not just, if you really don't believe, why don't you just release him? I mean, if you really don't believe that he's good enough to be number 2, then why would you just keep him? Is it because you don't want to look bad potentially? I don't know what their mindset is at this point, but I will say this as I'm jotting down just the quarterbacks that have gone in the first round. And I'm, 4 or 5 drafts into this thing. And I just wanted to take a look in the last decade. And guess what I'm finding? It's like there's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, and Josh Allen. But listen to the other group. E.J. Manuel, Johnny Manziel, Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Mitchell Trubisky, Paxton Lynch, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff. And so I'm just saying there's some okay guys there. And Goff, I guess Wentz was okay at one point. Baker Mayfield's shown some things. There's a lot of swing and miss there. So maybe our expectation was that this was less risky than it actually was.
No, I don't think it's that, Larry. I don't think it's that. Because I think the problem I have with the discourse surrounding the situation, and this is where I really defend Trey Lance, is because Trey Lance has been who we thought he was going to be, right? Like, Trey Lance was promised to be this young, inquisitive, vibrant, smart, eloquent person with ridiculous amount of physical gifts, the amount of mental capacity to match these gifts, and the rawest skill set in terms of actually playing in games that we had seen. Now, that raw skill set was combined with subtly advanced things that he did in the limited sample size we got, but it was very limited in terms of sample size. And before I go on, do you think he's been anything besides that? Like, do you think there was a part of him that was advertised before the draft that you're like, damn, like he was supposed to be smart and now I don't think he's smart. Or he was supposed to be really professional and look at him.
Well, I can't speak to the character other than because I don't really know the
Just
person.
speak to what you've seen as someone who covers the team in such a close proximity.
Yeah, I would say that, the one thing it's hard, I've been told forever that if you're not accurate, it's hard to change that. And I see a guy who, I also see a guy who, like, I see good arm strength, but I don't see Flacco. I see good athleticism, but I don't see, the kind of mobility that makes me go, "Oh, he's a burner." He's not a burner. He's not a he ran for 1100 yards, but he ran like over people at a
Right.
lower level. He's
Right.
not he's not a runner for a quarterback as like an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's not running away from anybody at the
Okay,
NFL
fair.
level. So I guess, and I don't see I see a little bit of like, okay, so he's not a speedy runner. He's more of a powerful runner. Um, so he's not, so what is he as a runner? He's not a running back. He's more almost like a fullback. And then as a thrower, I see a stronger than average arm, but I don't see any real consistent timing, touch, and accuracy.
Did
I
you
don't
see those things in college? So do you feel like there's
know.
a
I mean,
distinction from what you saw in
I
college?
saw
And so
good numbers. I saw
that's
good
my
numbers.
point. That's my point, right? Like I don't think he's a different player than what he was in college. And the 49ers knew that and they drafted him and now they're complaining about issues that already existed. So then when I come to the draft pick and this is where I defend Trey Lance, it's hard for me to blame Trey Lance for being who Trey Lance is. If you were going to draft him, there was a certain plan, there was a certain thing that you had to embrace, knowing that you were taking the rawest quarterback in NFL history. The rawest quarterback in NFL history. He
Yep.
threw the ball less times from his freshman year in high school than Trevor Lawrence did in 1.5 years at Clemson. And Trevor Lawrence threw it more 4 years in high school and all of that. So they took the rawest quarterback in NFL history. And then you want to blame the quarterback. I cannot get myself, even though I was skeptical of the situation prior to the situation, I can't, and this is why I constantly defend Trey Lance. I can't get myself to blame the player in this situation when the player is exactly who we thought, quote Denny Green. He is who we thought he was. And we let him off the hook.
Well, I mean, you can't. To me, you can't blame the player for not being what you thought he was going to be. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like he missed. It wasn't like he sold himself as the second coming. He just said, "Here I am," and let people evaluate, and they evaluated on their own. But the hardest thing to do is to evaluate the quarterback, and there's just lots of and just looking at the last decade of quarterbacks in the NFL, there's far more misses than there are hits, even in the first round of the draft. So what does that tell you? It tells me that it's just a really hard position to evaluate.
Mm-hmm.